Okay, so let's go ahead and get back into our coverage over the Avengers. And we pick up with issues number 24 and 25. Now, in this two-part story arc, we're kind of getting the idea of the possibility of the Avengers going through another roster change. And here's the reason why, because as we dive into the opening pages of the storyline, we do get reminded about what's currently happening for the Avengers and the public. Because let's not forget, for the public around this time in Marvel Comics, you had the people being very upset about the idea of the Avengers not adding people of color to their team. Because really, when this team was put together, wasn't really anybody of color on the team. Now, for me personally, I know the Avengers. I already know that over time, the roster is going to change, going to bring in some more people, and there could be a possibility of someone of color being on the team. But the thing is, for the public, they want something changed now. But the problem is, for the Avengers, they kind of feel like if they go out of their way to add somebody of color, are they doing the right thing? Let me explain. It's them saying, like, if we go out of our way and add someone in of color to our team, would that person feel okay being on the team? Because that person could possibly feel like they were just added on the team so the team can have somebody of color on their roster. But at the same time, will the public truly accept the idea of us bringing in somebody who is someone of color? Now, you also have other things going on for the public. Like, for example, the idea of the organization who has been kind of running campaign against the Avengers to kind of say they're horrible people to the public. And that would be the triune understanding. Now, remember, the triune understanding, their main goal as an organization is to help people reach like their full potential. And so the reason why I'm bringing that up, because in an earlier video, they were trying their best to chase down a certain villain that arrived at that location that belongs to the triune understanding. And so when it came to Steve Rogers wanting to question the actual organization, they kind of felt like the Avengers were trying to say that they had connections to the super villain they were after. Now, in reality, they do, but to the public, they don't know that. And so, right now, for the Avengers, they're getting hatred from the public left and right. But after that, we begin the process of getting like small updates about what's going on with the team. Like, for example, when it comes to Justice, in the earlier storyline that we had covered, he got injured. And so it has been a few story arcs. So we do see the idea of him now finally being able to get out of his cast so that he's able to be active again on the Avengers roster. Now, Vision was also on the team, but Vision left in the last story arc. And the reason why, because for Vision, he kind of felt like with his brain patterns being copied from, Wonder Man, he kind of felt like he had no choice of like everything Wonder Man liked. But when it came to him falling in love with the Scarlet Witch, that felt different to Vision. And matter of fact, he felt very excited about it. But then when Wonder Man came back to life and got with the Scarlet Witch, for Vision, he now felt like once again, nothing he liked came organically. It came from the idea that his brain patterns were copied from Wonder Man. And so he went away. And so for Wonder Man and the Scarlet Witch, they have been trying their best to locate Vision to hopefully bring him back home. Now, I should also mention that when it comes to this book, it does take place after a few story arcs when it comes to the X-Men that we have not officially gotten into, like the idea of Genosha now belonging to Magneto. And for Quicksilver, he's now working with Magneto when it comes to them having that country under their control. Now, with all that being said, for Quicksilver, he came over to the Avengers. And here's the reason why, because there were a lot of people outside that are connected to the triune understanding. And for Quicksilver, he also had a few people that were now popping up in their country as well over in Genosha. And so for Quicksilver, he kind of believes that right now the triune understanding is doing something to lead the public to turn their back against the Avengers. And matter of fact, when it comes to the Avengers government liaison, he kind of believes the Avengers are completely wrong. And the reason why, because he's also part of the triune understanding. And again, for him, he's all like, they're not bad people. Their main goal is to help humans reach their full potential, their peak potential. And so for him, he's having a hard time believing that the organization that he's technically part of is actually evil. But you didn't have the Avengers alarm go off. And that is when we see this aircraft that's kind of shaped like a coliseum just floating across New York. And of course, it's hitting buildings left and right. And so you do have the Avengers rush in to figure out what exactly is going on. Now, for some of the Avengers like Thor and also Iron Man, they know what's up because they had fought against this enemy not too long ago. And again, it took place in another X-Men storyline that we'll cover down the road because where we are right now with our X-Men coverage, we have not reached that point where that story had basically picked up. We're almost there though. But anyways, for the few Avengers who know about the situation, they're kind of like, there's no way they could be back again. If they are, we might have a problem here. And that would be the exemplars. Now, for me personally, the exemplars are kind of a cool concept in Marvel Comics, and let me explain. You see, for the exemplars, they have huge connections to the Juggernaut. As we all know, for the Juggernaut, he gets his powers from the Crimson Gem of Sidorak. Well, there's other powerful beings like that who have left items behind for someone to find to gain abilities, and that would be 8 of them. And so once you have all 8 different artifacts been found, they're supposed to form a group called the Exemplars. And what they're supposed to do is divide the human race into 8 different groups and then basically have all 8 groups battle against one another to kind of see which group would be able to win. That group that does win becomes the ruler of the entire earth. Now, here's the thing though, because for Juggernaut, he was not down with that idea at all. And so when it came to him, Iron Man, I want to say Thor and part of the X-Men team as well, they had worked together to bring down the Exemplars. The problem is that they're now back again, but they're now coming after one particular person. And yes, you called it, it would be the Juggernaut. Because again, they're supposed to come together to take over the human race and divide the race up into 8 different groups to then have a huge battle. And so, of course, right now, they're very upset with our guy. And of course, when you do have the Juggernaut appear, he begins to beg for the Avengers' help because, again, some of the Avengers know about the situation right now. And that's why you have Thor and Iron Man freaking out. But for the rest of the team, they have no idea what's truthfully going on. Now, you do have some of the exemplars being able to begin their process of attacking the Avengers to get to Juggernaut. And really, when it comes to the ending of this first chapter, the battle does not take long because they are then able to grab Juggernaut and get back on their aircraft and just leave. And so for the Avengers, they're kind of like, yo, what just happened here? Like somebody was able to bring down that powerful character and take him away. And so now for the Avengers, they had to go out of their way to save, well, the Juggernaut. But as we transition into the next chapter, we kind of get into the idea of beginning the process of understanding the exemplars a tad bit better. And you see what I mean by the time we get into the ending of this chapter, because for the exemplars, they really do express their anger with, King Marco, the idea that he did not join their side when it came to taking over the earth and begin the process of the all-out war between all 8 parties once they had taken over the earth. But I want to go ahead and transition back over to the Avengers. Because with the idea of the protest still going on, the whole idea of them not having anybody of color on their team, but also the fact that like the Avengers has a mutant on the team. Because around this time in Marvel Comics, when it came to the Scarlet Witch, she was a mutant. And you also have Firestar there as well, who's also a mutant. But it's the idea that they have no one of color on the team, but also they have a mutant. And let's not forget, this is post-Onslaught. lost. So right now, the relations between humans and mutants are at an all-time low at the moment. But anyways, while you do have the protests continue on outside Avengers Mansion, well, you also have the Avengers building a device that could possibly help them kind of get closer to the arena. And I think earlier I called it an aircraft, but in reality it's arena just floating in the air. But they're basically building some kind of device that will allow them the chance to get onto the actual arena without being shot out of the sky. Now, also in this chapter, we're also beginning to see the Avengers bring in different characters to basically help out with this situation. Like right off the bat, we see Hercules arrive. And of course, he was called there by Thor. Now, when Hercules does arrive, let's not forget that he was an Avenger a while ago, but also the fact that like when he does arrive at Avengers Mansion, he sees the protests outside the place and kind of wondering what in the world is going on. And so you have Thor being able to kind of catch him up to speed. But I want to go ahead and shift our focus over to the Scarlet Witch. Here's the reason why. Because for the Scarlet Witch at the moment, she's very upset with Quicksilver. Because for Quicksilver, he's now working with Magneto. But here's the thing, because for Magneto, even though technically he has Genosha, it's Magneto trying to turn that place around. But it's also Quicksilver kind of keeping an eye on his father, but also trying his best to turn that country around for the betterment of mutants across the world. And so for the Scarlet Witch, she kind of feels like she lost her brother to Magneto. But it's Quicksilver saying like, listen, I know I'm not really around as much as I used to be in the past when it came to protecting you, but at the same time, you didn't lose your brother. I'm still here. I will always be here for you. The thing is, I want to make sure that what dad is doing is right. I want to make sure that that country does get turned around and the people there do get the help they truly needed. But I kind of want to go ahead and shift our focus back over to Captain America. Here's the reason why. Because for Steve Rogers, it's him currently just looking at different information about the exemplars that was collected over time. And what he kind of realized that when it comes to the exemplars, well, they all were just regular people before they had found their different items that had belonged to different powerful beings that then turned them into powerful characters in the world of Marvel Comics. But anyways, for Steve Rogers, he realized, yeah, they were all just regular people, but they all had complained about the lack of something in their lives. Now, for Steve Rogers, that right there could possibly help him bring down the exemplars at the very end of this video. But you didn't have Steve Rogers get a call from Jarvis. And it's Jarvis saying like, hey, listen, so some of the protesters have gotten a whole lot worse to the point where now they're trying to climb over the gate and run to the front door. Here's the problem with that, because when it comes to Avengers Mansion, this place got some of the best security across the entire world. And the thing is, though, when you do have a few protesters get caught by the security system, well, we already know. Knowing the media, they're going to somehow spin that in a way to make the Avengers look bad. But when it comes to Steve Rogers, you didn't have the Avengers government liaison kind of bring up the report that Steve Rogers wrote earlier. You see, for Steve Rogers, he said, hey, listen, when it came to the exemplars, they had arrived, they grabbed Juggernaut, and they had left. And so for the government and also the Avengers government liaison, what he's saying right now is, okay, but why are you trying to go out of your way to save that guy? And Steve says, if we don't, what kind of example are we setting for other countries around the world? Because basically now you're saying that other countries are allowed to enter America, grab somebody and leave. And if that person is possibly a bad person, even though technically we have not proved it yet, then you're saying, oh, well, he could be a bad person, so why not go ahead and allow that other country to take that guy away? But then here's a catch though. What if that person is technically innocent? Now, on top of that, though, is him saying that you also have other super villains who might then think the same thing as well. Like, oh, you know what? Let me go ahead and go in America, grab somebody and leave, and just flat out lie and say, oh, that person is a bad person, and that's why I took him out of your country. It's Steve saying, like, we're setting up a bad example for the rest of the world. And so, knowing the Avengers, we should try to go out of our way to save Juggernaut's life. But we're also kind of getting the idea of the possibility of another roster shakeup because for Wonder Man, even though technically he did not officially rejoin the Avengers, he has been going on the last few missions. But it's also Wonder Man trying to figure out like what is his next move. And most likely it's to find Vision. We also kind of get the idea that Firestar and Justice might also leave the team as well. But before we get those answers, you did have the Avengers get called away to, well, go after the Exemplars once and for all because for Hank Pym and also Iron Man, their device is complete. And this kind of leads into the long part of the storyline, the long battle. And the reason why I'm saying that because there's like different phases of the actual battle. Because once you do have the Avengers being able to get near the floating arena that's being used by the Exemplars, you also have the Avengers being joined by Spider-Man and also Nova. Now, once you do have the entire party being able to use Iron Man's and Hank Pym's device to kind of break through the Exemplars' defenses so that then they're able to land on the arena, you then have the Avengers fight against the Exemplars. Now, like I said earlier, there are different phases in this actual battle. Because at first you do have the Avengers struggle, and it kind of makes sense why they would struggle because you are talking about the idea of the Avengers going up against powerful beings who got way more power than they have on their side. But on top of that, for Steve Rogers, he begins to realize that the Exemplars are very arrogant. Way more arrogant than Juggernaut is. In matter of fact, for Steve Rogers, he begins to believe the spell that was used to turn the Juggernaut into the Juggernaut was not technically completed. And so when it comes to the rest of the Exemplars, it was, and so they're not really acting the way they used to before they had went through their godly changes. But for Steve Rogers, he also realized they're not really able to work as a team. So, a brief moment, we do see the Avengers being able to kind of get the advantage over the Exemplars. But that advantage goes away very quickly once you have basically the Exemplars begin to kind of work together and overpower the Avengers. And now all our heroes, except for one, are prisoners. And of course, the one that got away would be Steve Rogers. Because what Steve Rogers is trying to say, like, listen, you guys are very arrogant. But on top of that, you guys are not really acting like yourselves. This is Steve Rogers just wanting to have a conversation with them because he said, listen, before you guys had became this exemplar group here, you all were just regular humans who had their own lives, who had their own goals. But all of that was taken away from you once you all had became the exemplars. And so it's him saying, are you guys so the same person y'all were before y'all had went through y'all changes, or now you guys being controlled by those powerful beings who gave you your powers? Because technically what your role is now is to come together as the exemplars, take over the human race, and then have a big all-out war between all 8 parties to see which person has the right to rule over the world. But the thing is, you all are being controlled by powerful beings. You guys are not really able to have any type of free will. And so it's Steve saying, are you guys even still human? Now, Bedlam, she's the youngest, but it's also her realizing like, what he's saying is true. And so she does use her abilities on the rest of the minds of the exemplars to kind of help them see what Steve Rogers is saying. And so once you have all the exemplars see what he is saying is technically true, they all leave. And so now for the Avengers, they're now also able to leave, but at least with the Juggernaut as well. But the book ends on a note where you have Steve Rogers say, hey, I'm out. And the reason why he is leaving, because it's the idea that with the media being able to take everything the Avengers is doing and spin it in a more negative way, it's Steve Rogers saying there's somebody out there trying their best to ruin the public image of the Avengers. The problem is, as your leader, I'm not somebody who's technically able to deal with that. You guys need a different leader who can find a way to tackle that kind of problem the Avengers are having. And so you have Steve Rogers get up and he just leaves, literally walks out the door. And you're kind of wondering, okay, hey, Steve, where in the world are you going? But the book does end on that note right there. So with that being said, guys, please leave me a like down below and subscribe. But guys, see y'all next time. Later.